Good evening, everybody. I welcome you all to the Knowledge Tuesday session. I'm Archana from HTIC MedTech Incubator hosting the session. So I would request all the participants to kindly stay muted and please unmute yourself while you speak. So before we start, I would like to make some key announcements. We are running an accelerated pre-incubation program. We have successfully completed the first cohort program by onboarding 24 startups, and we are opening application for the second cohort program. So we'll be posting the application link in the chat box. You can have a look, and then we are also conducting a virtual-thon event next month. So we'll be opening the application by the end of this week. Keep us follow on the social media handles and also our website. We'll be posting our website link in the chat box. Follow us to know the updates on the upcoming programs from HTIC. And for today's session, we have with us Ms. Lea Dias, who's a CEO and founder of Quæfacta and former clinical advisor at Lamson and Oxanium. And the topic for today's session as blockchain and AI in healthcare. Over to Ms. Lea.
Thanks, Archana, for introducing me. So, and thank you all for joining today. So I'll just tell you a bit about me. I'm Australian, born in Australia, but originally my family's from Goa in India. And I graduated as a clinical pharmacist, actually, and I worked a lot in hospitals, so doing every sort of specialty from neurology, oncology, through to cardiology, general medicine, through to pediatrics as well. And in 2011 and 12, I got an opportunity to work in the space of digital technologies. I was working in a pediatric hospital, a $1.2 billion pediatric hospital, and they were implementing robotics, electronic medical records, and solutions to enhance patient care and also to modernise and develop the technology around the healthcare system. And in 2016-17, this brought me into the space of looking at other solutions and particularly around blockchain. So it became a very interesting thing for me. So I started researching a little bit more into it, and in 2018-19 I decided to start up my own company, and so I've been working in this space for about 18 months to 2 years. So I'm really happy today that I can share some of my knowledge with you, and also some of the milestones we've achieved in this time, and also how blockchain is now becoming adopted within the healthcare sector in terms of not only things like supply chain, but patient empowerment and health data privacy as well. So we're going through one of the biggest health crises in the world at the moment, and it's affected all of us. There's a huge degree of uncertainty in our lives and a lack of clarity as to where things are going at the moment. We're all waiting for this coronavirus vaccine to come out, but it doesn't hold all of the answers. So it's a very unclear time, and of course there's been enormous amounts of economic and social ramifications, and the impact on healthcare is huge. And so during this time, having a health background and also a technology background, myself and my team from Quæfacta have really looked at finding solutions in how we can use some of the technology that's available to reach out to as many people as we can, because these type of crises really bring up the vulnerabilities in the healthcare system, and also exposes a lot of the inequalities that occur in healthcare. And I really think that as we move forward, we really need to address all of these issues. There's also things around concerns of patient privacy, and also addressing the fragility of our supply chains as well. So the health crisis exists, but this is not a new thing. And I think as we go forward, we need to think about future planning for this. But this health crisis has existed for many years now. And some of this has looked like health information gaps, so which leads to fatalities and deaths. And we'll discuss this a bit more in more detail during the talk today. There's been concerns for patient privacy. So addressing this, like more recently looking at things like contact tracing apps that have been brought out, but also some of the legislation that's been put in place that looks at personal health data as well across the world, and also look at some of the disruptions in supply chains and how this has affected the supply chain and the events that have occurred around COVID-19, and also into the future how we talk about making more robust supply chains. So firstly, going through the health information gaps. So this has been a real area of interest, particularly for Quæfacta, and something we're really looking and focusing on at the moment. And we know that health information gaps lead to medication errors. And who pays the price for this? Well, it's the patients, because they don't own their health data and they're not able to successfully communicate in every situation what they need, because they haven't got full access to their data. There's no secure way to port this data around from one healthcare stakeholder to the next. There's also no proof of consent. So although we might get into a hospital and do a proof of consent, there's no documented proof of consent that we can refer back to. So I think that this is a really important area to talk about moving forward as well. And then there's also a failure to track and monitor our health outcomes as well, where a lot of patients suffer from chronic medical diseases and also early detection of diseases. How do we monitor this and use this information in a way that's not only helpful for the patient, but also for the healthcare providers and each of the stakeholders that are involved in the healthcare value chain? And what this results in is that these problems become costly and dangerous. So the patient healthcare relies on disconnected systems. So we're still relying on outdated systems like paper systems, bespoke systems. So each siloed system that happens from your GP to your hospital health system to your pharmacist having their own system as well. All of this information is disconnected. And there's no easy way to exchange this data with your different health providers. And this is a really costly exercise. So you can see here that duplicate radiology tests waste about $20 billion in the US. And a wrong diagnosis, so being incorrectly diagnosed or misdiagnosed because you don't present with all of your medical history, for example, to a hospital, your allergies, your past medications, including your epileptic medication. If you get wrongly diagnosed, then that damages, and it costs about 12 million errors occurring in misdiagnosis as well. And medication errors can cost about 42 billion. And I think that's a really underestimated figure. That's coming out of the WHO. So by consolidating a patient health record can save the US industry 13 to 21 billion a year in duplicate tests and administrative expenses. So so let's look at privacy concern. So for me, who's accessing my data? How do I access my data? How do I know what's the last time I had a tetanus vaccine? As a parent, how do I know the last time that my children have had their vaccinations or immunisations? When are their next immunisations due? As a chronic disease sufferer, how do I, as an elderly patient, I need to get to my specialist and I need to get to my hospital. How do I get them the right information so that they can make the best decisions for my healthcare? And now there's this contact tracing app. Is it safe? Can I protect myself with that? Do people know where I am and where I'm circulating? So these are really concerns that are happening in the world today, and they really touch on our privacy as well. And of course, there are disruptions in the supply chain. So this is typically, in my eyes, a downstream supply chain. There's many actors that work on this supply chain, everywhere from truck drivers through to manufacturers, shippers, planes. All of these are responsible for delivering goods, so pharmaceuticals, medical devices and medical equipment. And we know that there are vulnerabilities in this. Our supply chains are very complex and they're orientated more around just-in-time delivery. They focus on efficiency rather than robustness. And when things go wrong, they become weak and fragile. The disruptions around COVID made these supply chains broken, so things couldn't get to where they needed to get. The medical supplies, the vaccination, the medications, all of these could not get to where they were rightly meant to go. And a lot of these processes are based around humans as well, so they're manual. And once you take people out of the equation, then the whole thing collapses. So it really is a matter of strengthening these supply chains and understanding what goes on in this. And also, companies have to prioritise how they best do their urgent and critical requirements and supplies. So they have to prioritise their cold chain supplies, their medical supplies and equipment, urgent medications as well. But when this all collapses, what happens? Well, it gives way to illicit activities. So there's a lot of money involved in this. There's a lot of fake drugs that come onto the scene, and there's no way of protecting these supply chains when things go wrong. And this is a space Quæfacta has worked in quite a bit over the last 18 months, really understanding the problems around medication fraud, the $200 billion medication fraud industry throughout the world. Means that 1 in 10 medications are fake in some of the developing countries. It leaves gaps in the transfer of information, and also the regulations that are put in place are not consistent throughout the globe. So you may have countries like the EU and HIPAA in the US that have put in regulations that allow all items to be tracked. But once those items move out of the EU, that's when exposure and counterfeiting and illicit activities happen. So here you can see a photo in Cambodia here where 1 million people are dying per year through therapy failure. And I think that that's actually an underestimation of actually the activity and of the fake and bad quality medications that are getting out to the market. So as I mentioned before, there are regulations that have come in place to really mitigate some of this, and they've been quite enforced by the EU and the US. These are the ones I'm quite familiar with. The Falsified Medicines Act, the GDPR, which is the Protection of Personalised Information, and also the Medical Devices Directive as well. And you can see here how these have been rolled out, the decision-making around this, and also where we look towards going towards more full serialisation into the future as well. Okay, so just going into what we've done in terms of our proof of concept as well. So Quæfacta, we're really looking in this case around the supply and distribution of medications from France to Venezuela. And I really leveraged my knowledge of logistics and supply chain, standards like GS1 and barcoding as well, together with my medical background as well. So there was an ability to look at this supply chain. We looked at blockchain timestamping for proof of delivery and medicine verification. We were exposed to real life events because of the problems, the political problems around Venezuela. There was a stoppage of the aeroplanes flying into Venezuela as well. So we had to find other ways to deliver. So we worked towards the shipping industry here. And so we looked to ship our products over. Medications went missing, and then finally they got found again. And then we had to go through the issues of trying to issue private public keys to the humanitarian organisations to scan in the drugs as well. So it wasn't the pandemic crisis, but we were dealing with our own crisis there to get these medications across this supply chain. And what it really demonstrated to us was that there was robustness in using the blockchain because it was able to timestamp and show that delivery and proof of delivery as well. So there's been some amazing innovations that we've seen across the globe happening as a result of COVID. And I think we need to really mention this because there's been a lot of wonderful minds working towards finding solutions here. And some of the solutions that I've really seen are things like virtual medical consultations, like telemedicine, contact tracing apps. I'm working with a company at the moment that's looking at buccal preparations to treat acute respiratory distress in patients going through COVID. So really drug discovery as well as really taking off non-invasive diagnostics as well, looking at oxygen and other ways to diagnose quickly, rapid diagnosis. So I think that this really needs to be highlighted. And what I'm really going to talk about today is the blockchain and AI part of this. So let's talk about blockchain. So this is a technology, and we need to really remember this. But the reason that it made a bit of sense to me is that I knew business very well, and the healthcare business very well. I knew that there were lots of stakeholders involved in that, and that information went missing throughout that, and whether it be products or documents across this chain with no real transparency. There's a lot of actors involved in there, and there were these information gaps. By introducing a distributed, decentralized database, not one person owns this information anymore. So this information is now decentralized across the different entities. It's stored cryptographically, so every time information is added in there, there's an algorithm that works in the background, and then it stores it in a block, and I'm sure a lot of you have been familiar with the workings of this. And once it's actually stored in the block, it's immutable, so it's not it's tamper-proof, so it can't be exposed by hackers or people getting into it. Or if people do try to hack the system, you can see that there's somebody that's been trying to get into it. And what this allows is that it allows the data to be transparent by the different stakeholders and healthcare participants that are using this, so they can all have visibility into the process with different levels of permission where they can access certain amounts of information. And I think that's a really important part, where people can have partial views of information. And in this, you can also incorporate some of the business logic as well via smart contracts. So proof of consent, for example, once that consent's been done, then you can store that in the blockchain, and different stakeholders can have visibility on that. So, for example, if you're talking about a clinical trial, then it can be accessed by FDA, CROs, pharma companies that are involved in that process as well, and they can all see now that this patient has had consent and can begin the trial, for example. So let's talk about some of the really interesting use cases in healthcare, because now it's being applied to many different cases. One that we've discussed already is the supply chain, the use of supply chain around pharma and medical devices. The medical records interoperability, and I think that this is a really important part to talk about, mainly because I think that this is what Quæfacta is working on at the moment, so it's quite close to my heart, and also because it's really about how we democratise data into the future. So this is a really big word to use, but also how we steer towards patient-centric healthcare. So patients owning their own medical record in one complete, secure, personalised health record, which is owned by me. And that means that I can securely travel with this information, so it's portable. I can share it with my different specialists, my allied health professionals, my pharmacy, and I can share and conceal this information and choose how I want to do that. I can also use different parts of this to track information like vaccination information and medication as well. And so this is one of the areas that we're really working on. And I think that this is really talking about the future of healthcare as well. Digital identity, and what is digital identity? So this is matching a patient to their medical records and their information. So when you have a healthcare, when you present to a hospital or a healthcare facility, it's very difficult for you to be identified against your medical records. And statistics have shown about 1 in 5 patients are inaccurately matched against their patient record, which increases to about 50% of patients that are inaccurately matched when they present at a different hospital to the one that they previously went to. So that means that the identity of the patient is not easily available. Let's talk about clinical trials and genomics data. So this is a big use case for blockchain that's becoming more and more prevalent in the world, mainly because there's so much information and documentation involved in this, and products and patients involved as well. Stakeholders including pharmacovigilance, for patient recruitment and consent. All of this requires a great deal of paperwork, which means that the next step can't be done until this step has been completed. So really understanding that value chain around clinical trials and how that immutability and transparency can really help in streamlining these operations. So what benefits do we provide here? We bring patient safety, better quality of patient care, we can decrease the costs, and we can give more efficient operations through the value chains. So just going through those, restore trust, improve interoperability through the exchange of data, streamline the operations, so delaying gaps, for example, in terms of time to get patient information around their past medical history, and also making quicker decisions on their healthcare because we have all the information available. And most of all, empowering patients. How do we really get patients to understand more of their healthcare and use it in a way that they can use it to their advantage and make better decisions around their healthcare as well? But it's not without its challenges. So I think this is also what we need to, or what we've been really confronted with as well. One of the biggest challenges that I haven't written up here, but I think it really needs to be mentioned, is where the knowledge around blockchain is still really limited, and we really need to understand how this works, and it's a bit daunting for a lot of people. It's a bit of a mystery. So really educating on people on the advantages of this technology and what it holds for the future. How do we store this health data off-chain, on-chain, if it's immutable particularly? If we lose our private key, this is a weak point. And also it's complicated not only to understand blockchain, but also to explain its return on investment for businesses and industries. What about blockchain and AI for patient empowerment? So this is one of the things we're looking at. It strengthens the trust and the patient engagement. So it puts the patient, it gives them more confidence, and it puts them at the centre of their healthcare, so they're able to engage with different health professionals and make some decisions around their healthcare. It personalises them, moves towards more of a personalised medicine as well, where we can tailor our healthcare around genetic makeup, data from wearable devices. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we go along. Enhances privacy as well, and it monetises data and rewards. And we'll go through these different scenarios. So let's talk about strengthening trust and patient engagement. So let's go back to our supply chain, because I think this is a really easy one to visualise about the disruptions. So as we start to record the data and create visibility in this supply chain, we know that it's been disrupted. These are the products. So we can make an example of the patient information, the records and documents that go across the supply chain, the medical equipment, the ventilators, the vaccinations into the future as well, lab tests, for example, or diagnostic kits as well. And here we go, on our left, we've got all our stakeholders involved, our healthcare providers, our facilities, our manufacturers. And then we have a distributed ledger that is encrypted and then and digitally signed. And we can share this in a decentralized, so no single entity owns this. It can be shared with all of the different people in the network. And so what you've got is a distributed ledger and different levels of permission that these people can now have enhanced visibility and transparency across this value chain. So what does this mean for patient empowerment? So as a patient, I now can have the key to all of my healthcare information. So I'm able to store this information, my identity. I can share this information with my hospital, my healthcare providers, my specialist radiologists. So this is really the key around it, and I can securely port this data from one stakeholder to the next. So this means as a chronic disease patient with 20 or more medications, I'm able to go and see my geriatrician, my diabetes specialist, my cardiologist. As a parent, I can store all my vaccinations for my child on this portable device that can then be digitally encrypted and shared with my different stakeholders. So boom, once the vaccine comes in, there's a way of tracing that back as well. So what are businesses doing around the world? So we've got, they're also trying to improve the transparency, the interoperability, increase the security and restore the trust. And in US, they've taken this quite seriously. There was real disruptions and failures on their supply chain in March, April of this year. And they laid out a strategy, and it was quite an ambitious plan, but they've allocated 50 million to a strategic national stockpile. And this is about tracking their medications and their supply chain activities across these supply chains using blockchain nodes for tracking purposes. There's also been other projects that have involved diagnostics around COVID-19, so they've been putting a lot of efforts and money into those solutions as well. Let's look at another stakeholder, World Health Forum. What are they doing in this space? Well, they're encouraging companies to move away from paper, so digitalise. Data privacy for suppliers as well. So certain levels of permission on data that they can share and they can conceal as well. They can the idea of providing incentives for suppliers as well. So you know, the incentives is a really interesting model, because at the moment you've got a $200 billion fake drug industry out there. So people are not incentivized for doing the right thing, but there are a lot of people out there doing the wrong thing. So how do we change this model that we're actually, bringing some reward to people that are for doing the right thing as well, so we can enhance our diligence and vigilance around those supply chains. So a little bit of an explanation on how Quæfacta have done their work as well. We can capture information through sensors, through QR codes, 2D codes and so on, anchor that information in a blockchain. We're able to validate the information and analyse it, and then we secure and store it safely in our blockchain, a distributed ledger. So this is a little example of scanning a med and then creating a unique identifier, which is our transaction hash. What are other companies doing around the world? So Patient Tree has looked at more of a patient-centric approach and how patients can store their own personal health data. Hash Health is also doing something in between that with digitalised data as well. And Apple Health is moving towards this space as well. Merck is looking at different programs like plant-to-patient tracking of raw ingredients to patients as well, to look at clinical studies and patient outcomes. Storing of e-leaflets, so from more of a, I guess, a consumables point of view and also a sustainability point of view, not having lots of paper and so on, but able to access this information quite easily through your apps and smartphones. And also MediLedger have got about 95% of the market now in the US, where they're doing product verification solutions, which are barcode scanning. And now they're looking at doing revenue management solutions, which is payment systems along the blockchain as well. So next we want to talk a bit more about the patient privacy aspect of this. So, and I really appreciate there's a lot of information in these slides as well, and I'm sure you have a few questions, so we can get to those pretty soon. So what does contact tracing look like? Well, contact tracing was brought about to track the spread of COVID. So it's a practice of finding people who've been infected with COVID and then alerting people that may have come into close contact with them and tell them to self-isolate. And this was really to curb the disease outbreak in the very early stages and the progression of the disease. But as we know, well, there's privacy concerns around this, where we can use this contact tracing app to maybe reopen schools and organisations. There is real concerns about privacy. Some countries that have really successfully done contact tracing, like China and South Korea, there are some questions, have they done this at the expense around the privacy of patients? And I think that this is a really important thing to understand, is that we all have different legislations that we adhere to. So we here, I live in France, I'm from Australia, but we really look at patient privacy as the priority here, and that we you know, patients should have an idea or a choice to whether they want to share their data or whether they want to keep that private. So I really think that that's something important to look at. For example, Apple and Google were able to bring out a contact tracing app, but of course governments can't enforce the use of those apps throughout the US or throughout the world. Singapore brought out a Bluetooth app, but when patients were questioned about this, about 57% surveyed said that they don't feel confident whether they're around whether their information is stored privately and securely, so weren't willing to exchange their personal data. There's been some advanced cryptography projects and blockchain projects happening in this space as well, and I think that this becomes a very interesting area where you can look at encryption of patient data and also de-identified data as well. So watch that space into the future. So I'm thinking about this as well. There's been some ways to look at how to handle COVID into the future. So we can't go back in time, but we can really sit back and think, okay, what do we need to do into the future as we go about tracking and understanding how we share information as well in this time of COVID and into maybe future epidemics and so on. So there's this company that, 3 companies that have worked together, Open Health Company, which is a French organisation which works with open health data, FICPA, which looks at security and have in the past worked in the cybersecurity space, and also KS1 time stamping as well, guard time. It looks at time stamping medications and so on. So they put their heads together and they're looking at something which is called an immunity passport, and it's a certificate that helps, or document that helps people move, whether it's travelling and moving towards more travelling in your own country, but also travelling internationally as well, which is what we're all hoping to do in the near future. And so there are a couple of things that we really need to think about when we think about the immunity passport. Well, first of all, we don't know whether there's so many unknowns about COVID at the moment. If you've had it once, do you get it again? And what does the immunity profile screening look like? Once we get the vaccination, what does that look like? Does it mean that we're all vaccinated? Does everyone have access to the vaccination? And I think that this is really important. And even if we have access to the vaccination, is it the real vaccination? So these are really areas that need to be addressed. I've talked in this table about fit scores as well, and I think that there are different mechanisms that are out there in the market to look at fit scores. But this is more a question, is this something that we can do to record patients that are in a high-risk group category, or patients that are able to go back into the communities and work again, and you know, like our 20 to 40, 50-year-olds that may be fine when they get it, and they are able to now go back and socialise and work in communities, which I think is really important. So looking at this and trying to understand who's being social distanced, who is being able to get back in there and socialise, and what does the antibiotic testing and vaccination look like, and also the immunity passport, and how do we avoid privacy breaches when it comes to our patients as well, A, B, C and D. Okay, so AI for personal medicine. So this has come quite late in the presentation, but it's not any less important than everything we've been talking about. And I think that this is a really, the area that we can look forward to into the future of, I don't know, being our own doctor, I think is a way to do it. And by having the access to health data, our own health data, we're able to maybe find ways we can use this data to have better lifestyles and improved lifestyles and ways of living as well, by being able to make decisions around that data as well. Like I explained before, personalising tailored therapies as well is really important. The power of AI can be observed in areas like precision medicine, medical imaging, drug discovery and genomics. For instance, like a cancer patients in the past who've received really cookie-cutter treatments but have really high failure rates. The AI sophisticated pattern recognition can be used that patients can have access to personalised information that is tailored to their genetic makeup and their needs and their lifestyle as well. So I think that this is really an interesting area. So by being able to pull in data like your wearable devices and other information, we're now able to make more of a highly accurate diagnosis, which can look at things like chronic disease management and early disease detection. So having notifications when our diabetic monitoring goes off, or with our early disease, that maybe our lifestyle is not really suiting to where we go into the future. And there's abilities for notifications on things like medication refills and script refills as well, which talks about adherence to therapies that can benefit patients into the future, to have relapses and illness into the future as well. So I think that this is really how we optimise therapies in patients and improve healthcare outcomes. And so a very interesting area is monetising this data and healthy behaviour rewards. And I know this is not a area that we know well, and it's something that is very new for all of us, but it's something that can be powered also using the blockchain, and also understanding that if we are holding our health data, there's a way that we can use this. So as a health professional, we own our data. And you can see here patient A these are patient A and B are glucose. They have diabetic patients here. And patient A is doing all the right things and participating in their lifestyle, eating correctly. They've got a great fit score there. They're doing all the right things. They're being monitored by their healthcare professional as well. So my data is being sent, my alerts and notifications are sent to my doctor. I don't need to go in there all the time because they can monitor my medications in this way. So what can we do to really encourage patient A to continue on their path? Well, maybe we can look at giving them a reduction in their insurance premiums. Maybe we can look at giving them some tokens to encourage them to continue on their way. So this may look like spending those tokens on their yoga classes, or spending it on their medications to put that money back into their healthcare, and other ways that they can look forward to something as a result of doing the right thing. We don't leave patient A behind. I think we really need to look after all of our participants in this. If they're not, if their parameters are out and their glucose levels are not well, we can find some strategies to really look at how we look after them and really sort out the better care for these people. So this is really raising the idea of inequality and the social determinants, trying to give patients access to healthcare throughout the world in ways that we can provide them information and access to that information as well. There are some companies doing this. There's ULife. They're also already working with an insurance company to reward patients. There's Nebula Genomics that give out tokens and fiat money as well as a result of sharing data and information. So, you know, there's been a lot of information here, and I really appreciate everyone for spending this time with me, but I really feel quite passionate towards healthcare because it's been my vocation for many years, and I really believe that we can get to a more personalised healthcare, precision medicine, where patients can really be the centre of their healthcare, their own doctor, and they can really make decisions to better their health into the future as well. So, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Lea. We have some questions. We have the first question from on the medical data. Pawanram, do you want to go ahead and ask the question?
Pawanram from Deep Star. Am I audible?
Hi.
Yes.
Hello, am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you're audible, Pawan.
This is Pawanram from Deep Star. I have a query regarding the data you gathered about the fertility rate, ma'am. How did you exactly get those data and
Sorry, Pawan.
Sorry.
I couldn't hear you properly.
Yeah, sorry, the connection's quite poor. Sorry, I didn't hear that question, Pava.
I think my question will ask it now, ma'am.
Okay,
Okay, sure.
let me ask the question, or else Pawan, from the chat box.
Yeah, okay, ma'am.
From
Sure.
so his question is, from where did you gather all those medical data that you showcased on the slide regarding the fatality rate due to lack of past medical history?
Sorry, I'm just going to read the. Where did we? Sorry, which one is it? So we haven't worked with patient data yet. That's one of our next product developments. When the case study that we did work on was proof of concept that tracked the medications from France to Venezuela. So that was the actual project we did. But in terms of health data, where we look to do that is that it would rely on the fact that hospitals have digitalisation in them, or GP clinics, and gathering that data. So for a start, it would have to rely on health data. And I know that not everywhere we're going to have people that have access to health data, especially like in countries, developing countries, or more vulnerable countries like in Africa and in India, of course. There's a lot of information that's not available in a digitalized form. So it's how do we now turn that into a more digitalized form of data so we can gather that into a blockchain, have it in an immutable form on a decentralized ledger. So we would rely on having electronic health record systems in hospitals, in GP surgeries, in pharmacies, to be able to access all of this and aggregate all of this data. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Pawan.
Thanks,
So
Pawan.
we move on to the next question from Mr. Jnana Krishnan. How AI and blockchain combine to change and improve the healthcare, pharma, and biotech industries in 2020?
Right. So really what I found, Gunnar, is that during this time of real crisis, a lot of people are not, I wouldn't say interested, but because they're in such emergency crisis mode, there was a real, to get supplies out and to get the right medical equipment and to find different distributors. For example, when Wuhan shut down, a lot of these countries had to think, okay, do we bring the manufacturing back to our country, or do we find another third-party provider? Like, how do we mitigate this risk? So they were really in emergency crisis mode, and that's one of the things that we found. Even though we had a solution to help them, they weren't ready to look at the ROI or implementation of this, and they didn't understand blockchain. So for 2020, I think it's been a really difficult period to do this. But saying that, there have been some amazing companies. I'm working with one at the moment called D-Clinic, and they are working in the blockchain space, and they've signed some pretty big contracts. They're a biotech. The healthcare. Biotech is their niche, and they're looking at tracking clinical trials across and working with some pretty big companies now in the US. Indonesia was their first test ground to do their proof of concept, and they were able to get documentation onto their blockchain for immutability and share this with other health stakeholders along this. And what benefit that's provided for them is about how you quickly get these clinical trials and products out into the market. So some of the blockages and the bottlenecks occur when documents get lost. You can't find the proof of consent. There's there's a lot of gaps in the medical information. The pharmacovigilance, for example, in pharma and biotech, things aren't being recorded properly. Information is missing, and this all leads to gaps in those value chains. So by using a blockchain, you can see very visibly, okay, this person hasn't done this activity, so that needs to happen before I do my activity. So this streamlining of operations really improves healthcare, clinical trials, drug discovery processes. And this particular company are looking at buccal devices for acute respiratory distress, vaccinations as well. How do we get those out to the market a lot quicker with reducing all the bottlenecks that occur?
Thank you. Maybe a follow-up question to that in the chat box. Is blockchain, IoT, artificial intelligence combined and poised to shake up healthcare?
Right. Okay. So I think shake-up's a great word because you can see it as a good thing and a bad thing. I think a couple of years ago when I first started, it was there was a lot of cynicism, I guess, or skepticism towards blockchain because it was so associated with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and DeFi, decentralized finance. So it was really probably not looked at in the most positive way. But fast forward to 20, and it was also associated with a lot of the failed ICOs, the initial coin offerings as well. But fast forward to 2020, and I think it's becoming a real, really interesting for a lot of companies. We're still in very early stages of development and understanding it. But yes, it has the ability to shake up healthcare because particularly what I'm talking around, the ownership of data, I think that is a really important concept. And I don't think everybody quite understands what that means to healthcare and what that looks like. So I think that's the shake-up I see really is this ownership changing.
Yeah. Thank you, Leah. The next question from the chat box. From digitalizing medical records to managing and protecting them, the blockchain and AI. So what does the future hold? Do other companies need to follow this technology?
Right. Okay. So other companies, by other companies to garner, do you mean in the healthcare space or do you mean outside of the healthcare space? We can address both as well. So for companies to follow this technology, what does the future hold? Well, I think that what my experience has been is that a lot of this has been in proof of concept, but there's some really, really fantastic use cases I've seen, particularly around the agriculture space, around the food technology space as well, with the tracking of tuna when it's been caught as well. The tuna can be tracked along that supply chain as well when it gets to the delivery of that. The other one is the tracking of pesticides as well. So you can see the proof of origin of where those products have come in the industry. But I think one of the best use cases I have seen is really in the food space as well, to really understand when you go into a supermarket and you're able to scan and you're able to see what's in that product and the proof of origin. So I think that's really the important part of it, is identifying that this is being manufactured in this country, it's been ethically sourced, and this falls back into that incentivizing companies that are doing the right thing. If things are being ethically sourced and sustainably sourced, I think there's a real need to identify those companies and really incentivize that, and that moves companies into a space of really wanting to do the right thing for a better world. So I really believe that companies can benefit from them. I've seen it in the art world as well, and so there's many different use cases of this technology.
Thank you, Leah. So, we have a couple of questions from Kaushal Kotari. Kaushal, do you want to go ahead and ask your questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah. Hi, ma'am. So, ma'am, my first question is, what do you feel is the biggest challenge for blockchain adoption?
Sure. So, Kaushal, I think that the biggest challenge for me in the last 2 years has been the lack of understanding around blockchain. Also, not having one standard blockchain. So it's it becomes a bit nervous. Companies are nervous if they don't know whether to go for what's a permission blockchain, what's the public blockchain, what's a consortium blockchain like. So this is really unclear about which one to pick if I go down it, and what gives me and what advantage is that for my company. So if I implement this, what do I gain from it? Am I saving money? Am I saving lives? So you could have a lot of regulations out there that you can adhere to or try to adopt as part of, particularly for me, as part of how we incorporate this technology into companies, but there's still a limited understanding, and I really believe that this will change in the next year or so as people become more, understand the technology more, and we see that there emerges more activity in this centralised space and people wanting to move away from more this centralised model. I'm not going to have a go at companies here, but I'm going to explain the difference between a decentralised and a centralised model. We know Amazon, for example, has got a really centralised model. They know our activities, they know everything we're doing in terms of the data they collect around that. They've had a great business model for doing that. But is that really how we want to go into the future? So this is really trying to get people to understand what decentralised ledger technology means has been a very big challenge in this space.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. So I have a follow-up question, and partly I think you did answer for my this follow-up question also. So there are many blockchain programs going on. However, the current medical space is not trained to use the technology. Do you think there is a huge need for training of the individuals to use them? And I think you did mention about the understanding of the people do come in that part. So do you still think that, so basically the training of the people is apart from the regulations is a major big challenge for the companies to move ahead with blockchain?
Sure. So that's a really interesting question, because as a clinician, do I really believe a pharmacist or a nurse or a doctor on the floor needs to understand the technology behind it? I don't believe that they do. I do believe that they using an app and understanding how to use my app and to have notifications and alerts on my patient and how to manage my patient is for those two stakeholders, so the patient and the healthcare provider. I don't think they really need to understand the full dynamics of that, but they need to know how they can share and conceal their information. So, for example, if I've been into a hospital, I present at hospital, and my doctor in hospital, my emergency doctor, asked me for the information. Sorry, Kashmir, could you just put yourself on mute for a second? Thank you. Sorry. So when the healthcare provider comes to me, they ask me for my past medical history. I have to be able to share with them that using my digital encrypted key so that they can get that view of my past medical history. Now, when I go to my pharmacy, I have to be able to share that information with them. So does that really mean that you need to learn how to use blockchain, or does it mean you need to know how to be responsible for your healthcare? And I think that's going to be the real challenge into the future, is really that gaining that understanding with the information that I have, that I can use that information to the best of my ability. So I think that's clinicians in the healthcare space and also patients in that space as well.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kaushal. So we have a few questions from Jnanakrishnan. Jnanakrishnan, do you want to unmute yourself and go ahead with your question? Okay, let me ask the question. How long will hospitals take to start using this technology with proper training? And how expensive it would be to start shifting technology in terms of infrastructure and software?
Right, okay. Good questions. So in terms of hospitals, I really think that the blockchain technology doesn't become the thing that's expensive in hospitals. I think the thing that becomes expensive in hospitals, to be honest, is the electronic health records and integrating that information in hospitals. Particularly, we have seen the uptake of electronic health records across the world in the hospitals. And I say hospitals, but I also mean community healthcare providers as well, and community facilities and GPs. This technology relies a lot on being able to digitalize processes as well, or to be able to upload documents in a digitalized form as well. So, upload documents so you have them available on your smartphone, for example, or your device. So in terms of blockchain, there could be expenses around, and this depends on the models around what your service agreements are with that. Are you providing like a SaaS technology? Are you providing a mobile application? Are you providing a licensing fee? This goes more into what is the cost of the technology. Is it highly expensive? Well, yeah, it's a technology, but it's not a I think into the future, we won't see it as being the major cost. We'll see a lot of advantages by streamlining the processes around operational. So the efficiencies that we will see across these value chains will be able to be redistributed into having, spent on the clinicians, about the training, and all of these different aspects that we can really redistribute costs. So, for example, at the moment, if you can use AI-powered tools to do more accurate diagnosis in pathology and radiology, medical imaging, for example, then the reductions you can save on that can then go into building more powerful algorithms for precision medicine, for example. So I think that it needs to be looked at from a holistic point of view and not just looking, okay, how does the blockchain get implemented and what is the cost of the blockchain, but holistically, what's the costs and the savings here? And also, how do we go towards digitalising healthcare into the future as well, so we can provide more of this transparency? And I think they're the real challenges that we face globally in trying to address some of the inequalities that exist in the healthcare systems at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Lea. So the next question we have from Parag. Mr. Parag, do you want to unmute yourself and go ahead with your question?
Hi. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you for a great learning on blockchain and AI, which we have no idea about. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I work in healthcare, in cancer space, and I work in Indian medical device industry. And I always think these all technologies should come in every device and every working space that we have in healthcare. However, I always feel how the affordability will be for a common Indian person. If we can make it affordable, what we have in India is huge people. I mean, 1.2 billion people. So do you think, my question is, do you think the adoption in countries like India or in Africa, where the affordability is minimum, these technologies can be adopted and in fact can bring down the cost substantially, make it affordable?
Yeah,
thank you.
sure. No, that's a great question, Parag. And I think that this is the real life situations we need to look at and really address, because they are, it's one thing to have the US doing their wonderful things on the blockchain space, but we need to think about how this can be, this technology can be used globally across the world, and especially in countries that have been really compromised by this crisis at the moment. So really, in response to that, there are two things that come up for me, is really around governance and having groups and committees that are really advocating for things like protection of personal and privacy from a government level. So how do we incorporate these regulations into the countries, and there are barriers to that as well, and I completely understand that. And then the second part of that is and also the Falsified Medicines Directive as well. So you have a government that's trying to stamp out fake drugs and fraud and things like this. And the second one is that how do common companies contribute to this? And I really believe that the countries that I have found that really want to adopt these are the ones that are the more vulnerable communities. So we've talked to people in the poor parts of Malaysia that want to implement this technology. So they do it because they want to be able to give them more access to health services and healthcare, not only that's available within that small rural area, but be able to be connected with healthcare professionals that are in the major cities like Malaysia. And I think that these opportunities, by doing proof of concepts and really understanding how to use this technology, can then generate governments investing into this. So advocating and having groups involved in this, I think, are really important to advocate to how you look at this technology from a top-down approach, and having, like in the EU, where we're quite, we have the EU Observatory Group and Forum, which is blockchain and healthcare, and I sit amongst that. I've been on a couple of special interest groups as well, and I'm also sitting on a group that is looking at ethical and responsible use of AI. So I think that this addresses, even though we can solve a problem, it addresses new problems. But I think the idea to get involved in forming committees to think, okay, how do I want to do this from a top-down approach, pulling solutions in, and then using that government funding in a way that you can minimise costs for them into the future is a strategy to look at this. But I'm not saying I have all the answers to this, by the way, Parag, but it's a way that I think that you can get adoption of this technology in a more efficient way that's less costly.
Thank you, Ms. Lea. So, sorry for some of the participants, we could not take the questions in the chat box or at the interest of time. So before we wrap up, yeah, I would like to make the few announcements. Like I've already said in the beginning, for the participants who have joined earlier, we are running an accelerated pre-incubation program. We have successfully completed the first cohort by onboarding 24 startups, and we are opening the call application for the second cohort. We'll be posting the link for application in the chat box. Also, we are conducting a virtual-thon by the coming months. So we'll be posting the application in our website and also in our social medias. We are hosting Ask Me Anything series on the coming Thursday. So hope your participation's over there. And please do follow us on our social media. And also we'll be posting our website link in the chat box. So you can take a look to follow on the upcoming events. And participants, please fill the feedback form for us to improve the upcoming Knowledge Tuesday sessions. Thank you, Ms. Lea, for your time today. It was really indeed a great and informative session. So usually we will post our Knowledge Tuesday sessions in our YouTube channel. Hope it is fine with you.
Sorry, sure, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lea. Thank you all the participants. Have a good evening.